Hello. So today I'm going to be talking about nature's influence on the humanities, and how nature still influences us today. We all have a connection to nature, whether we like just going out and camping, whether we just like watching the sunset on our drive home from work. We all feel some sort of connection to nature, and it has influenced us all in at least some way, big or small, depending on who you are. Uh, in the early times of man, we felt so influenced by the world around us that we decided to um, take a snapshot of the world that they saw and what was important to them at the time, which obviously would probably be food. So you can see that they chose a lot of animals that they would have hunted and eaten. And so for that, we can see that nature influenced them enough because they didn't have to draw these paintings, and their time probably could have been spent better finding more food to sustain themselves, but they were in a place comfortable enough to where they could take the time and use the materials to make this art that we can still see today. We can see that the lines they used are actually very nice and smooth, and it does paint a very good picture um, about what they saw back then, and we can even recreate some of this today, which is what the article that I got this painting or this painting from said. The shapes are overlapping a little bit. You sometimes an animal is half in, half out animal, like the bear is coming out of the bull. It looks like, and there's just deer kind of forming one big conglomerate in the middle there. Uh, Color, you can see they used a lot of earthy colors. The black is probably charcoal that they had from an old fire. The brown might have been mud at the time, and they just used whatever they had around them, and they were resourceful enough to come up with the colors that they saw in nature. A lot of animals were brown, and they found a way to incorporate brown. So they used a lot of earthy tones, nothing really pastel, but it does look very good for considering what they had at the time. The texture, I mean, it's on a cave, and it's not very good, but they did the best with what they had, and it still survives today. So they did a pretty good job. Unity is really not existent. They kind of just looks like they just painted wherever they felt they could fit another animal. They didn't finish the horse. It looks like that's a horse on top, but I guess that's up for interpretation. Variety. Uh, there's all different types of variety going on here. You can see some predators such as bears. You can see some food such as deer and maybe the bull, and you can even see maybe how they got around. Which, if you want to call that a horse on top, you can call that a horse on top. The emphasis it really looks like is on the bulls, due to the fact that they're up front and they're black. They're much darker than all the other animals, so your eye kind of goes to those first because they're the most clearly defined. And then as you look, you can kind of see the bears and you can kind of see the deers grazing and stuff. So the emphasis definitely is on the bull, and it looks like the movement is from the bulls to the deer because the bulls are looking at the deer, and maybe even the bear, if depending on where the bear lies here. Uh, the proportion here, there's not really much proportion going on here. The bulls are obviously much larger, which could indicate that we are by the bulls and not, and also looking at the deer next to the bull. But the bulls are definitely, they seem to be the most important due to the fact that they're up front, their size, and they are all black, which makes them the most distinctive out of everything in this painting. And their interpretation of nature through this can affect us too, because we can see how the world was through them, and then we can live their human experience in a way through this painting by knowing what they saw, and then we can compare it to what we see, and then we can add to our human experience based on their own painting of nature, which I think is really cool. So moving on, we have the Water Lilies by Claude Monet, and this was painted in 1906. I've seen a bunch of different years that this was created on, but that doesn't really matter. Uh, this is a pond with a bunch of water lilies, as you could probably tell by the title, and you can obviously tell that Mr. Monet was very influenced by nature due to the fact that he actually painted nature. That would be a good indication he was influenced by it. And we can also be influenced by this again, kind of in a similar way as cave drawings, to where he left it enough. We left it blurry enough to where you can make your own interpretation of what everything is, but still kind of knowing what everything is. And then we can connect it back to our own human experience, and maybe we would be moved enough to paint something similar. So this could just create a cycle of influence in the humanities, not just because the painting is of nature, but because the painting makes us think of nature. And like I said before, we all have a connection in some way, shape, or form to nature. You can tell this by the lines he used aren't really existent. It looks more like he just blotted paint where he wanted, because there's no sharp, crisp lines, which helps people put their image of a water lily or the pond that they might remember from a childhood in place, because it is a little blurry. So there is some room for us to see what we want to see. The shapes are very rough. They help you. We can connect to the shapes because the painting says water lilies, so it makes us think of water lilies. So we know what he meant. But they aren't very well clearly defined, perfect looking water lilies. And that was his style back then, was just to have kind of everything rough, and so he left it up to us for interpretation. He used much more vibrant colors than they had back in the cave drawing, obviously, and he did a good job of blending the colors, so it's not just like water lines. You can tell it's water, because he used different shades and different thicknesses of paint in certain areas, so you can kind of see how a pond would be uh, today. Painting's also kind of unified, but kind of not. Uh, it's not asymmetrical. I'd put it more in the unified category, because everything is kind of together, and it's not like split in half like symmetrical, but everything is pretty proportionate. Like to the front to the back, you can see that there's still more water lilies in the back, and there's some maybe seaweed in there too, and there's still room for interpretation. Um, but everything's pretty well unified. There's not much variety to this painting. It's pretty much just water lilies and seaweed, or if you want, it can maybe even be a reflection of something off in the distance. Uh, Balances, I would say it's asymmetrical. It's not very very well balanced, but it's not terribly balanced. And overall, we can see that obviously he was moved enough by nature, that he decided to paint this painting, which is a very well known painting today. Moving on, we go into film, and film has used nature a lot and has had influenced a lot by it. The movie that comes to my mind when I first think of nature being influenced is on film is Into the Wild by John Krakauer. This is a film about a guy named Christopher McCandless. He grew up in a fairly wealthy home. He graduated college and everything, but once he graduated college, he donated everything he had to charity, and then burned all of his identifications and decided he was going to live on the road. Uh, this movie is very popular. It was very popular when it came out. It still is pretty popular. It's a very good movie, and it has influenced a ton of people's lives. So much so that you can see he's on a roof. It's a bus, and it's called the Magic Bus. It's in Alaska, and a lot of people make the journey out to see this bus where he died. They go out to see the bus because they were so moved by his life, because he gave up everything materialistic just to be outside and to be in nature, and then to make a film about it was obviously influenced by the story, but it was also influenced by Christopher, because it was his story, and he really cared about nature and was just fed up with man and how man was treating one another. So he decided to give all that up and go out in the wild where everything made sense. So we can see our connection back to how we connect to nature is we feel at home and at peace with nature, and some of us feel so much so at home that we give up everything else and we just decide to be strictly um, in nature. And these are the sources that I used to get my images. And thank you very much.